Hello, everybody. You're listening to The Soloists. My name is Diana Brown. I'm here with my friend and co-host Mallory Everton. And today we are talking to Leah Libresco Sargeant, who recently published her second book called The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto. And it's nice to have you here, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so your book begins, the first line of the first chapter, it says that the world is the wrong shape for women, and that the world, in the way that it's designed, it treats human persons, both men and women, as autonomous, unattached, and interchangeable, and assumes that women should be treated this way in order for them to have dignity. So you point out how in social spaces ranging from like medicine to the workplace, that women are often made to feel like a problem when they don't experience themselves as, autonomous, unattached beings, especially during like menstruation or pregnancy or childbirth or nursing or just parenting in general, which are all of these things that show the way that we're just fundamentally connected to each other. And that's not even to get into everything of other forms of caregiving for elderly parents, for example, or for people in our lives who are going through seasons of difficulty or disability. And that we're kind of trained, and the world is designed to make us experience these things as interruptions to this need to be independent. And you're wanting to see a world that sees value in dependence instead, and sees that actually as like integral to what it is to be a human being. So just to, just check in with you, does that feel like an accurate summary of your book? And if you wanted to tell us why you wrote it and what were you hoping that readers would take away from it?
It's a great summary. And I think that point in particular, the idea that there are all these moments that are normal parts of a human life, like menstruation, pregnancy, the illness of a parent or a loved one, that we see as interruptions from our real or normal lives, is really a core thing I wanted to take aim at here. Because I think you can't live well in those seasons if, first of all, you think of them merely as seasons, as though your real life is on pause. And you won't be able to plan for them if you keep seeing them as kind of temporary aberrations as opposed to the pattern of your life as a whole. And part of the reason I frame this book as a feminist book is because there are obvious ways this falls more heavily on women and earlier on women, but men can't get away with pretending to be autonomous either. They just get caught later.
Yeah, I found myself, as I was reading, Leah, like, I felt so called out, honestly, as a person the entire time, trying to wrap my head around how programmed I am to see dependence as weakness and to see that as bad. And I have felt this many times, especially recently. I'm a 36-year-old woman and I'm single. So I feel like this is a very painful time to be a single woman. It's like your late 30s, early 40s. It can be very painful if you're hoping to have children. And so I have thought that many times about men in general, like, well, they don't have to face this in the same way. I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time, how I can reframe that actually this is a gift. That the opportunity to be able to see yourself as a full human is a gift.
Well, here's part of how I'd frame it, is that our society asks us to lie about who we are as human beings. And the question is, either when do you acquire the moral fiber to say, I can't and I won't tell this lie, it's wrong to tell? And I think people only sometimes get there because they have a strong witness, a strong rootedness as creatures by a loving God rather than just autonomous individuals. But for people who don't naturally find their way to resisting that, when does it become obvious it's a lie and it's a lie you can't sustain? And if you think about it, that's true for all of us as children, right? No one is an autonomous individual at birth or before birth. But we don't remember that part of life very well, and we kind of think of ourselves as growing out of it and then transcending it. It's an apprenticeship in being human. We'll give it to you as a rounding error that you're a person, but then you're going to leave that behind. And so if you're a guy, you can go a while without really feeling caught publicly. You get bigger, you get stronger, you get a job. And especially if you put off marriage for a while, then other people's fragility doesn't necessarily interrupt your life. If you're young, you're healthy, your parents are on the younger side, they're not having memory or aging or cancer issues, you don't have a wife, so there's no one in your life who could also get sick and need you, who could be pregnant and get physically weaker, You might make it a long time while looking as autonomous as you're expected to be, but sooner or later, unless you're hit by a bus at 40, you're going to be caught one way or another, either through your own weakness or that of someone you love. And the earlier you admit it, the better you're able to plan for it.
Yeah. And you know, it's just worth naming that I think thinking about dating and singles, it's such a common thing for singles in their 30s, especially single women, to be like, this is a moment where the women are caught in a way that the men just are not. But aside from that issue, there's so many ways in which just our modern lives like prevent all of us from getting caught. Like I feel like this is something that like karmically I shouldn't say out loud. It feels like a knock on wood, like a don't say it out loud. But
Means you
like
need to say it.
I have been no, you'll understand what I mean in a second because it feels like bad luck to say, but like my my grandma died about a year and a half ago. I am in my 30s. That was my first death that like really I should say my other set of grandparents died earlier in my life, but like I only saw them a handful of times in my life. And so I simply wasn't as close to them. It is insane. When in human history could a person reach their 30s before they started to be like, oh yeah, people die.
Yeah.
And it just, I've been like insanely lucky to have like a very large but a very healthy family. Like nobody in my family has had major health scares. Anyway, it's just to say that like there's so many ways in which modern life like prevents all of us from getting caught. You use another phrase like a false anthropology, right? That we have escaped the fragility because we haven't. And yet it's also true that we have been able to put to rest real forms of fragility and dependence that like just plagued human beings and were inescapable in the past. And we actually do sidestep them now. There's a lot that goes into sustaining this lie and making it seem plausible. That's quite interesting to think about.
And, I think part of it is there are ways that it's wonderful that we live in a healthier, more prosperous society, but it does remove some of the reminders that ultimately we're mortal, we're fragile, we need each other. And part of what I think is, I don't want to see more mortality go up as the way we remember this, but I do want to think about in an age where you go to funerals less often and less often of peers, and that's a tremendous blessing. Well, what is it that keeps at the forefront of my mind that I will not live forever? I will not be healthy my whole life. I know for certain there will be times when my physical need and my embodiment forces me to turn towards others to ask for help. How do I keep that at the forefront of my mind when I'm not being forced to?
Yeah, very well said. And I think that gets really close to what we're kind of doing on the Soloist project. So when Mallory and I started this, we were like, okay, we want to build a space that is offering support and guidance and comfort and a sort of like, we see you, we're with you, for people for whom the sort of marriage and family story has not been working out. At the same time, I believe like real spiritual risks of living life alone. And in particular, the way that like singles live today often, which is like apart from siblings and parents and aunts and uncles in their one bedroom studio apartments, going to their job every day, doing everything alone every day, and only ever I see people when I opt in rather than just being embedded and surrounded. That is kind of what being single as an older adult often looks like today. And that may have not even necessarily been true in the past when people just had different household structures. But anyway, so we wanted to talk about singleness in a way that like is affirming to the value of people who can in some spaces feel a little bit like lost, but also like really grapples with the risks of isolation. So your book talks quite a bit about the effect of childbirth and parenting on women and the way that that affects women as they move throughout the world, which kind of implies that they've already sort of solved the coupling problem. But anyway, I was curious as you were working on this book, whether you thought much about singleness and some of the challenges of coupling.
Well, in some ways, that was the focus of my book before this, which was called Building the Benedict Option. And it was a guide about building thicker Christian community wherever you are right now, married or single. What can you do to live deeper into community where you are in the next 2 weeks to 2 months? And I always framed it over that short term because the point was, what can you start right now rather than well, once things are settled, when the kids are bigger, when I finally get married, my life will start for real. Because, and this is where I kind of snuck the theme of mortality into both books, including one where you don't expect it. This is always your real life right now, healthy or sick, single or married. There's no guarantee you live to see tomorrow. So today should be a day you live as though it is your real life. And I think it is much harder to figure out, well, what's the way I build up that community in a time of singleness? Because people rely on the people who are always there in married life, on a spouse, on children in a certain way. And I remember one of my friends said to me when we were both single, well, if I never get married, I'm worried no one will make me soup when I'm sick. That there are ways that we do try and take care of our friends. And then there are things that you think of as the duties belonging to family that can be so attenuated as they're spread out beyond that tight circle that it's not clear anyone will answer you at all. So both in that book and in this book, my goal is take for granted that you and everyone around you are fragile and needy. So you've got to be opening up those small asks throughout your life, married or single, because no matter who you are or what station of life you're in, there will be things that come upon you that are greater than your own ability to answer. And even when married, it may take kind of a higher bar of need, but there will be things that are more than you and your spouse can do together. So what is it that binds you and your friends together so that it is natural to say, I have the flu, come take care of me. And for both of you to think, that's just what we do for each other.
Yeah, totally.
It makes me think about that chapter toward the end of your book, the lovely chapter about calling men into the breach. It's almost like you could give the same sort of speech to single people that you give to men, as far as saying that the answer would be in your relationships to offer yourself both as a vulnerable party and also as a supportive party. Like recognizing that you might be living in that false anthropology maybe a little bit more than some people have the ability to do. I guess my question for you would be, just on a practical sense, how do people get over do you have any recommendations for people to get over the kind of embarrassment of dependence?
It's practice. It's the only way to get over it. And I had people push back on the title when I was working on the book or announcing the book. We're like, well, why did you say dignity of dependence? Why not interdependence? We're giving and receiving from each other. I said, that's true. Most of the time we are. But if I called the book The Dignity of Interdependence, the book would not be scary or challenging. Why would you bother picking it up? You already think that's fine. The book is about what it means to genuinely be dependent and love someone who comes to you in that spirit, or be able to trust that you yourself will be loved. And the only way to get there is to practice asking for help. Ideally, start this week for anyone listening to the podcast. Ask someone for help with something you could have done all by yourself. So you're not forced to it by extremists. You don't even have the excuse of, I'm asking you for help because it's impossible for me to do this without you. It's, I'm asking you for help because I would like your help, which in some ways is harder. But it's by making those asks that you kind of build up the habit of finding that other people aren't disgusted by you being a human being. We can do a lot of rehearsing in our head of, oh, what would happen if I asked? And then using your imagined response as though it were real evidence. You only get over this by really asking and really seeing that people think it's normal. And I think what's even more the case, once you start doing this, you'll find that people ask you for help more because you have shown them you're someone who thinks this is allowed.
It's so true.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do, in part because I feel like we have so many just like constant messages about the need to be emotionally self-sufficient. In some ways, asking a friend to make you soup or give you a ride to the airport is like, those are concrete. You can just like cast it off as like, oh, we're just hanging out. But right now, you know, if I just scroll Instagram, it's a barrage of content from therapists, content creators, who knows what credentials, who are talking very much about these kind of like emotional burdens that we are constantly putting on other people, or that other people are putting on us, and the need for boundaries. And that to me is the most difficult kind of dependence, is a kind of emotional, like when I'm actually vulnerable. And that's not the same as just having the flu, of when I'm like, I actually really do need your forgiveness because I was kind of a brat last week. Or like, I actually just am really, really bad at these kinds of conversations and I'm struggling to know what to say. You know, the kind of thing where you really just have to tolerate another person's being or be tolerated. That is like such a deeper kind. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how that culture of like needing to be emotionally self-sufficient factors into this.
Yeah, I think part of that is the idea that parallels the idea that you're a person who doesn't have physical needs, that you're a person who couldn't have emotional needs that are too much, right? That we only do the things that are voluntary. I remember there was some, wild example text message like, are you in a space to receive information you might find potentially upsetting? Which is, of course, not how friends speak to each other in a moment of extremis or need. And I think, you also see that kind of crossing over of that term emotional labor. It was a very specific term for the woman who coined it. Emotional labor was about the things a waitress does, where she's not only going to bring you your meal, but she also has to pretend for a kind of friendship that doesn't exist. It was never intended to be a word that described how you interact with your husband or wife or how you interact with your friends. And I see people throw around like, this person told me about their problems at work, my good friend from college, but this is emotional labor. I haven't. I'm like, this is friendship, right? Friendship involves being interruptible by your friends. You're not strangers to each other, and you're not perfectly in sync. One of you can have a needier period than the other, and you don't get to pay each other back in full. And it's that idea of interruptibility I often come back to as the sense of how do you take stock of your life and see, am I living my life as an authentic human being? Am I relating to other people as full human beings, not autonomous individuals? I think about who has interrupted me lately. And if no one has, how can I make myself more permeable to interruptions? And if I haven't interrupted someone else, thrown off their plans in some way, what do I need to do to feel more comfortable having my life truly intersect other people's? Ross Douthat has a beautiful essay in Plough called The Case for One More Child, where he says, this is a thing where parents do this in an easier way. I know who can wake me up in the middle of the night because they sleep down the hall from me and they show up like with running feet and a big, but everyone should feel like, single or married, kids or no, there's someone out there who could plausibly put me at risk of a midnight wake up. And it may not be your kids. It may be that it's a friend, but you want to think I'm on the top of someone's list somewhere for if there's an emergency, they'll call me.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. It reminds me, a few years ago, someone recommended me Cal Newport's book on, it was a book about productivity. And I remember just striking me as like, I admire this man so much in some ways that this lifestyle feels so wrong, where essentially the whole point of it is to plan your life so you are uninterruptible. Make sure you're waking up at hours, communicating with everybody around you. Hey, this is my deep work time. Oh, that's what the book was called. It was called Deep Work.
Deep work.
Honestly, I crave the deep work and for my mind to be that focused. And yet I do feel morally compromised when I'm like tuning out other people. And I don't feel that. And this is, again, something that I think I'm like appropriately haunted by as a person who lives alone. I don't feel that every day when I live alone. But trust me, when I go back home for vacation and I'm staying at my sister's and I have my nieces and nephews, or just like, it's actually such a beautiful thing to go home and like to hear my siblings fighting, bickering with their spouses, or to like, overhear conversations with my brother and his boss, and just to like, even like the good and the bad, it's just like other lives. And I just am called into a different way of being. And I am like, honestly, a little disturbed by how uninterrupted I am on a day-to-day basis. And it is, I think that's quite an interesting challenge, is to think about how to be more interruptible. But really, I just like, what a beautiful, absolutely beautiful and healing concept to see that as a sort of like virtue, to be interruptible, rather than I think how we so often experience it is like, oh, I'm not getting anything done. I'm failing at all my goals for the day, which is, might feel like the trade-off sometimes.
And I do want to cop to the fact I do take deep work time, even as a parent, which is that I'll go to the coffee shop and work for 2 or 3 hours, and my husband has the kids, and, barring a broken bone, I understand I'm not going to get interrupted during that time. But I do think of that as that's the unusual time. Deep work time is the thing I make special provision for. My normal time is on-call time, even if I'm not explicitly on call or I don't know for whom I'm on call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's this thing I've been thinking about a lot lately. I think it was a Franciscan prayer. I can't remember all of the words. I have it written somewhere, but the post-it is fallen off my wall. There's a phrase in it. That says, "I have no cherished outcomes," and it's like about approaching relationships in that particular way. That if you can approach a day on call, like that's what I get when you say I'm on call. Like I don't expect anything in particular, but I do intend to embrace whatever's here. And I find that so beautiful, but I guess it's like philosophically and spiritually delicious to me and practically very scary and hard. Like I think probably because of the barrage of therapy speak that Diana is talking about, my immediate questions are like all about codependency and when does dependency become unhealthy and how do we field that in our lives when I mean, this is the case, I think, for all Christians. You know, when we talk about martyrdom, sometimes like it is the goal, and to an extent, it is at like a complete loss of self and gaining of everything because of it. But what are your thoughts on unhealthy dependency? Is that a thing? How do you approach?
I think there's two main kinds of things people picture when they're talking about this. And one is someone who's really using your compassion against you deliberately. It's someone who, it's not just that they need a lot, but it's that they don't will your good as they ask, that they don't think of you as a person. When someone thinks about being exploited by someone, whether that's someone who's explicitly financially scamming you and telling lies about what they need to trick you, or just someone who in their own mind and heart just doesn't think of you as a real person, but as a conduit of resources. And then that kind of relationship can be very hard to manage because you're not both treating each other as people on each side of it. But then I think the kind of difficult dependency that people also think of doesn't involve anyone as a bad actor. It's a sense of this person needs more than I can give. So what do I do? And there I think it's helpful to think about, well, what's the real problem here? Is the problem the magnitude of this person's need? Or is it the lack of slacking your own life that you're not free to answer in the way you'd like to? Eva Feder-Kidde talks a lot about how people who are caregivers often find themselves overextended, burnt out, etc. But in many cases, they don't say, wow, I wish I were less responsible for this person. They say, I wish I had more freedom to answer what they need from me, whether that's time off work, or if you think about someone who becomes a caregiver, then themselves becomes needy. So kind of needs a ring of caregivers for them, helping out, dropping off laundry so that you can be wholly focused on your mother in hospice, your baby in the NICU, your friend recovering from cancer surgery, etc. And so I think it's helpful to think, is the problem something about the way the person you're trying to serve is relating to you? And you or they losing track of the idea that you are also a person, also an end in yourself? Or is the problem you just need more freedom to care for this person, whether that's freedom that's unlocked by monetary help, other people pitching in, etc.?
Yeah. And I think like in the lived experience and lived challenge of this, and I think that women in religious communities, you know, fumble over this question all the time. And this, again, is one of the challenges with the psychologization of all of our interiority is this question of like, and how much emotional bandwidth, which is this phrase, what does that even mean exactly? How much emotional slack do you have? And like, I don't know if you have an answer to this question or I'm sure you know, but like, yeah. How do you tell that within yourself?
Yeah, this is kind of a question of prudence because clearly my level of emotional slack is not infinite. I'm not God. I'm not actually capable of loving each person I meet to the full measure of his love. And so part of the way I think about managing that is I want to be careful what I learn about that I'm not actually capable of answering and what will distract me from the actual people I'm called to steward. So Liz Brunig, the Atlantic writer, said once that the experience of looking at Twitter gives us a taste of God's omniscience with none of his omnipotence.
Ooh.
Where it's not actually that helpful for me to hear about every single thing happening in the world and just a cascade of troubles. And then for me, instead of responding in any way to each one, just feeling overwhelmed or even distracted, pulled away to just watching that flow, rather than bringing food to the food bank in my community, walking over to my neighbor who's just had a baby, checking in with a friend who's graduated and looking for jobs. So I try and think about both the near and far responsibilities I have being different. So my family focuses when we're trying to do far giving, where we're trying to serve people we won't meet, don't know. I do enough reading the news on a high level to have a sense of where could my money go furthest? Is there an acute need somewhere that we want to be focused on for disaster response? But mostly I give money to Against Malaria and Give Directly, where I know I'm going to reach some of the poorest people on earth in a reliable way. And those folks don't have the access to say, Leah, would you help me out? I have to think a little about the prudence of who to give who can't ask me personally. But I really take out of my feed that sense of, well, here's everyone's problem that they're tweeting about and that I'm involved in. When I do run across it, I try and say, well, okay, well, then my job is to take a little time to pray for this person. But since I'm not going to spend all day as my ministry praying for every person on Twitter, that means I can't spend my whole day on Twitter. I've decided that's not the main work I'm doing. I want to be free to do person-to-person relationship. So this can't be the primary way I learn about people's needs.
Yeah, that's really helpful to be very cognizant of the way that we're receiving and taking in calls from the world. And I'm going to be thinking about that, the omniscience without the omnipotence.
Me too.
I think it is worth remembering that it is true. Like, none of us are God and none of us have the capacity to care. And yet we are so much more elastic than we think sometimes. I saw a really funny meme the other day of just some girl. It was like a selfie, and then her little caption was like something like, how interesting. She's like, having a crush is crazy because you start seeing this, semi-autistic weird dude the way, like, why am I seeing this semi-autistic weird guy the way that God sees him? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Like, when you have a crush on somebody, or being in love, I think is, a rare experience, but one that really teaches you about the elasticity of your own soul and your own capacity to give in a really beautiful way. And I think that knowing that that's possible, that like when you're in that state, any challenge it's such a joy to give and to stretch yourself to meet a need for another person. And I think that often, that's not to say that we're omnipotent. We never are, never will be. It's part of the point. And yet to remember that, like, when we're tapped into a source of love, I think we are far more elastic than we sometimes let ourselves be. And that giving can be a joy.
Diana, I have to butt in for a second because I've been thinking about this a little bit lately, and because I think it also touches on what is such a big theme in Leah's book, which is that part of the reason that this dependency, there's so much dignity in it, is because there's so much truth in it. There's so much truth in the fact that we are wholly dependent on God, that we're wholly dependent in general, and not living in that truth. And I think the same thing applies to that elasticity or to that love. And there are deep truths in situations that also feel chaotic. Like, there might be a lot of lies to toss out as well. Like, I struggle when you feel that, and it can feel almost like God's presence with someone. And then you kind of interpret it to mean like something's going to happen with this person, or like, I'm going to end up married to this person. And then when you're wrong, you think you've been tricked or you've been lied to. But I actually find it very comforting to think that actually you are experiencing a deep truth, which is that you're extremely lovable, and so is this person. And then with the dependency, the same, that this person is showing you who you are too, that we are dust. And I don't know. I find something really gorgeous in that like we are sometimes having to sift through the treasures and really figure out, like, why did I feel so awake and so alive in this moment with this person? And it's because there was truth there. I think sometimes we just tell these other stories that are less true. But anyway, I love that thought.
No, I really like the point you're both making, because it should never be a surprise to find that we are lovable or that someone else is lovable, regardless of whether that means you have a brief encounter with them or wind up with them in your life for the whole of both of your lives. because God loved us into being. There's something I like doing when I'm in a big city or when I'm mad, depending. But it's if I'm on a walk in a city around other people, I try and take some time where I walk. I don't read, I don't look at my phone. I just look briefly at each person as I go by and think to myself, Christ, looking at him, loved him, which is what you have from the Bible when Jesus is talking to the young rich man who comes and asks, I've done everything right so far. What should I do? And Jesus is about to give him a hard teaching that he's going to reject. And we have to assume he knows what's going to play out. And still, what we're told is Jesus, looking at him, loved him. And so I just like to walk doing that. And what I find is everyone is better to look at, not in terms of are they attractive, just more beautiful when I'm trying to think about how God is looking at them. And obviously in the world, creation is too large for me to give that sustained attention to each person in the world. But it's a moment of the clouds parting to do it just a little bit and think, and God knows each of us, every moment of our lives. And what I feel just for this fraction of a moment, catching sight of his glory in this person, he knows intimately for all of us all the time.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I was really loving your chapter on the gift economy and the beauty that allows, also the stress, right? When by that you mean that a community or a network is sustained by offering gifts. And a gift means something specific here. It means being willing to give without any promise of reward, without any expectation attached, but that you kind of just trust the system that like gift begets another gift. And so basically, and it's contrasted with transactions where you know exactly what you're giving, why you're giving, what you're getting out of it, what you're going to get in return, what the outcome will be. And it can be stressful to live in a sort of gift state as opposed to like a contractual one. Now, I think one of the questions that I wanted to bring up in relation to, again, thinking about singleness, one of the challenges with dating is that it puts you in a place where you feel like you need to be scrutinizing people, and you do need to take a more like of a transactional or sort of self-protective stance as you're evaluating people. And in my experience, talking to people who have been married for a while, I feel like it's rare that you get somebody who wants to even enter this framework, because I think we all, or think about these questions, because I think we all sense that there's something about the dating mindset and about this choice that does not feel holy. It does not, it is like, for me at least, it is really hard for me to bring the kind of love of God, love of all man, that what you're talking about as you're walking through the streets. It is hard for me to think like, okay, but is that the kind of mentality that I should take to partner selection, to this most important choice? If it's okay, I'm excited to hear what you think of this, but I wanted to read a little bit of a little passage from that chapter that just reminded me a lot of how people talk about dating and the decisions there. You wrote that if adolescence is characterized by fear about giving ourselves away to someone or something unworthy, growing to maturity may be characterized by confidence that it is safer and more human to be swept into the flow of uncalculated giving and graceful receiving, rather than to hold ourselves back waiting for the right moment. Our burdens and our needs are our invitation into the dance. We cannot slough them off without becoming small, an isolated node where we could have been tangled up with others. And so I guess I'm just wondering how this whole concept applies to like partnership selection, because I think it is really common that like as you're dating that you do judge people either worthy or unworthy of that type of love. And is this just, how do you think these worlds collide?
So I do think that will make you feel crazy doing it that way. And I think it's a bad way to date. I in some ways had an easier way not doing this, because I knew it was the case that a number of totally marriageable, totally nice guys might not want to marry me in particular, and that was fine. So I was never trying to decide, is this guy a good guy or a bad guy? Is this guy marriageable or hopeless? I was trying to check, how would this guy, who may or may not be marriageable generically, feel about marrying me? And I always, on first dates, took what I would say was a high variance approach, where I think many people are trying to approach a first date with the goal of getting a second date. So, and I definitely saw guys who were doing this too when they were on dates with me. We were kind of being cheerful and pleasant and blandly inoffensive so that there's nothing that would give someone a reason not to go on a second date with you. And this was very much not what I was doing. My goal was that someone either felt really excited about going on a second date with me or did not want to go on a second date with me. And I didn't worry that if they didn't want to go on a second date, this meant that they had thought, wow, Leah is unmarriageable and a bad person and not a good wife to anyone. I just took for granted there were a lot of guys who were totally good husbands in theory who would not want to marry me because, as my husband now knows very well, marrying me means that every time I get a weird book out of the library, I sit down and like, Alexi, it's time to spend the next week hearing about eels. And then he does. So that's, I think, a different way of approaching it, which is lots of the people you meet are marriageable. And that's wonderful. And so are you, probably. And if not, there's your problem, right? But the question is, are you two ready to be married to each other? You don't have to be the one for each other for that to be possible. It's just a question of, are we both ready to get married? And how would we feel about being married to each other? And when I went on my first Frodo date, I would say, with my husband, we weren't actually dating. I was in New York to visit family. I had dinner with him as a friend. And sometime between when I scheduled the dinner and when we had it, it occurred to me that if I described him to someone else who didn't know him, if someone described him to me, I would want to know if he were single. So I thought I should find out and see where all of that was going. And at the end of our dinner, I said, well, Alexi, I admire several things about you and enumerated them. I don't know if it'd be a good idea for us to go out, but I'd be interested to find out. And he very politely said, that's very gratifying, but I'm actively pursuing another girl right now.
Wow.
So, yeah, so very polite. And the thing is, I didn't come into that dinner with a crush, right? I just thought about who he was and that he was a good guy and wanted to go on dates experimentally. So when I left that night, I thought, well, that didn't work out, but if I keep taking chances like that, probably one day it will hit. But as it turned out, the girl he was pursuing had a boyfriend he didn't know about. So 2 weeks later, he came back and asked me out on a date. And neither of us at that point thought, we're getting married. This is the only person for me. We just thought, I like and respect Alexi, Leah. I like chatting with her. Let's find out.
Yeah, great.
An applaudable lack of games. Like I'm blown away. I'm so inspired. I wish that that were more common, that people were so well, I mean, not only the fact that you were willing to say that, even though you weren't nursing a huge crush, which I guess makes it easier to say, but also can make it scary for some people. Just like, well, I don't know if I feel strongly enough that I don't want to lead this person on, but I think it's really refreshing.
I think it's so much harder when, and I think this is kind of one of the predominant ways people approach this, where the only way you get on a date is when one person has been nursing a crush for a while, so it's incredibly high stakes for them. It's only just occurring to you. And then saying no is sort of, or yes, are both too high stakes because this person has sort of made up their mind and you've only just started thinking about it. And I think it's much easier to do casual dating, not in the sense of heading back home together, but casual in the sense of a date is meant to be exploratory. It's meant to help you decide how you feel. And to a real extent, even when you develop a crush on your own, you still don't know as much as you will spending time with someone.
Yes, indeed.
You know what? I really needed to hear this today. I just was in my journal last night writing about basically the fact that I need to get over the idea that I want someone to be obsessed with me. And I love that that you were open to Alexi coming back. I feel like there's a part of me that would have been like, well, he doesn't care about me enough. He doesn't like me enough. You know, he wasn't prioritizing me. And so I appreciate this as a grounding, good information. Diana, you can cut this. I'm just like personally grateful to Leah right now.
Well, and I'm so grateful for his own lack of pride, right? In that I think it would be natural to say, well, you know, I can't ask her out because I just shot her down. And he's seems like a good idea. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Well, but you also, I think you made him feel safe to do that as well. And I think that, one of the questions that I ask myself sometimes is like, what is the amount of, what's like a healthy amount to feel prioritized at the beginning of a relationship, or like when you're just barely starting to get to know someone. And sometimes it's not very much. It's just enough to be honest enough to exchange those ideas. I am curious what you would think, just like while we're on the topic of dating specifically, how does dependence come into this conversation? Because it does feel like a bit of a minefield, given the sort of gender norms that can come in when we're talking about like I will admit that there have been times where when I've wanted a man to get closer to me, I've asked for his help, but it's so rare that he does that for me. I would love to be depended on as well. So there have been times where I've kind of grappled with this question without really being able to frame it in the terms that you do in your book. And I'm just curious how you feel dependence or dependency could play a role in early dating or just dating in general.
I think part of what people have always thought is you want to, in dating, be in a position to see someone's character, which is why people give that advice of don't just pay attention to how he treats you, pay attention to how he treats the waitress, right? Is this someone who's treating you differently than other people in the world, implying he's got these two categories of people, real people and unreal people, and eventually you'll slip into the other if he acts that way. And I think that's good advice. But I also think it means that you can gain a lot from getting out of the let's have coffee, let's have dinner, and just finding places where you're more exposed to the world, both of you together. You're doing a project, you're taking something on, and therefore, even without willing it, you'll reveal some of your neediness and how you respond to it to each other. So my second date with my husband, we had the proto date, we had a medium normal first date. Yes.
I love proto date.
And then for our second date, I invited him over while I was baking for a listen through I was hosting for the Hamilton cast album. It had just come out, it was very big. And I was inviting maybe 30 people over to my living room. And the date part of it was that he was coming over beforehand while I was making French toast or a French toast casserole like thing. And he said, Leah, I don't think you're supposed to put eggshells down the garbage disposal. And I said, you can do that. And I've always done it and it's not a problem. And it had never been a problem until that day when I put like 24 eggshells down the garbage disposal at once. And I broke my garbage disposal on my date with my not even official boyfriend. It can.
I've always done that too. Me too.
I still think it's fine for like one or two at a time, but it isn't fine for that many. Okay. So this is a date where I've broken my garbage disposal. I'm hosting 30 people in like an hour. The sink is now clogged. So everything I wash as I'm cooking is slowly raising the level of water in the sink. So you're kind of budgeting how much water can go in before it will overflow. And he's right there. And he doesn't say, I told you so, though he'd be justified if he did, because he understands it doesn't add anything to the situation. And we're both just totally focused on, well, we have a new problem. What are we going to do together? So I think sort of in some ways when you take on projects together, things will go wrong without it relying either on your kind of personal emotional needs or your physical weakness. Things will just go wrong and you get to see how do we respond to that. And it made me feel great about dating him because the whole project of trying to get married is finding someone with whom you'll take on the big project of, God willing, parenthood with and just have things go wrong repeatedly throughout your whole lives, sometimes through one of your faults, sometimes through nobody's fault. How will we weather this? When you're not breaking your own garbage disposal on dates, which I can recommend, but it doesn't work if you do it on purpose. I think it's great to, on dates, babysit sometimes together for a friend, and you get a real sense of, okay, we're now not so much having our own need exposed, but because we're caring for someone, we're learning. How do we respond to this? How do we clean up this mess? How do we comfort this child? I didn't realize someone could spill that much milk that quickly. What will we do? You can assemble furniture together. You can volunteer together. But I think dating that involves an exposure to chaos is fundamentally more fruitful than we're at this nice restaurant where people are taking care of us and nothing should go wrong.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and I think dependencies will naturally appear.
Absolutely.
Chaos brings up weakness fast, very quickly,
Yeah. I've been chatting with a friend recently who's going through like a bump in her like 20-year marriage. And we've been chatting, just like speaking of lies that we tell ourselves about the kinds of beings we are. But, she's kind of been wrestling with like, what does it mean for me to even be attracted to my husband at this point or for him to be attracted to me? And one of her anxieties is like, she struggles to believe him when he says that she's beautiful, or that, because she's like, how does he even see me? We're like sibling, like I've been here with,
Mm-hmm.
and or she doesn't like the idea of like a duty bound, you know. And I was just talking to her about how, like, for me at this point dating, there's the lie of autonomy and independence, but also so many things. It's like, I guess what I'm getting at is like, there's so many stories I could tell about Diana, and I'm so this, I'm so that. But it's like at the end of the day, all we are is our character and how we're like showing up to situations and the choices that we make in our hearts in little moments. And like, we were talking about that with her marriage. Like, what's actually so bad about somebody just being like, yeah, I want to be with you. I choose to be with you. That's where I am now. And that a love that is based on that rather than, I guess, the lie of our own specialness, or like,
Yeah.
I'm going to have the ultimate set of super seductive traits that will make this person locked in forever. It's like, I don't think anybody, I mean, the hottest celebrities get cheated on constantly. That's just not how love really works. Like, it is about who you show up to be. And I think that's been a little bit of a difference that I'm taking in dating too, is like, you just got to show up to how are people actually behaving in life and with you. And that is who we are, not the mirage, not the whoever they're presenting themselves to be online, or, all of that.
Also, I had at one point a friend who was always very insistent that his girlfriend was the most attractive person. She's the most beautiful. I'm like, well, what a bizarre thing to say, name redacted, because does that imply that if someone walked by who were more beautiful, that's just the most beautiful you found to date, that you'd be like, that's it, I'm out? And I think there's a lot of that kind of compliment that sounds like it's good by elevating a person in this way. It's self-refuting. If it's only you are the most attractive woman I've ever seen, then this relationship is only good until you see someone more attractive. And it's obviously not one that's oriented for life, because
Yeah.
no one, even though they'll be beloved, is plausibly the most attractive, hottest woman you've ever seen while you're getting chemotherapy, while
Yeah,
you're in the middle of
totally.
labor, right? So does your husband love you then or not?
Yeah.
I think this is so central to what you were writing about and what I really feel like I'm going to be continuing to chew on, Leah, because it feels like a rejection of humanity, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, I feel like when we're rejecting this part of our humanness, be it like weakness, failure, frailty, dependency. I mean, and in this situation, it's basically just like, how can I be bulletproof, God? Like, how can I be beyond tragedy of any
Mm-hmm.
kind? How can I ensure that my husband would never cheat on me or leave me? How can I ensure that, like, I think often that's almost what we expect from our partners or potential partners. And that's probably why I am like, well, but I want him to be obsessed with me because it's scary. It's so scary to just be like, well, I'm just going to have to like show up totally me, full human, tons of good qualities, tons of bad qualities, and say like, how do you feel about this bag of qualities, versus being like, I'm 100% a sure thing. If you don't, what, nobody is, there's no way to be bulletproof. And in a way, I feel like, especially young people, I think we struggle with it more. I just think we're going to struggle with it more. We can tell ourselves more lies about it, and not just when it comes to dependency, but when it comes to success, or when it comes to beauty, or when it comes to all kinds of things that make us look like we are untouchable by life. And I just find this I don't know, I find this so, I guess, kind of oddly painfully comforting. I had a conversation last year with a guy. We were talking about, he was mentioning, I dated a couple bald guys last year, and I was explaining to him like why I didn't mind, and I was like, actually, I think I kind of like it, because you're a person, like you're outwardly aging in a way that you can't deny, and there's a lot more beauty standards on women that require them to be like, that makes their, first of all, like, we're like the beauty standard, or like, we could talk about this for hours, but like, the sort of ideal female body skews much younger than it does for men already, but then there's not as many outward changes that men seem to quote unquote have to make in order to meet that ideal. But I like the idea of stepping into like real humanity with a person, and it's easier to do if we both come in with a certain amount of like undeniable humanness. And so I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about that and trying my best to see that as a virtue that I'm bringing to my relationships. My humanness is a gift. It's a gift to them and it's a gift to me because I can trust that they're making the decision not based on the fact that I seem like a bulletproof option.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of dependence that's, understanding just how someone's love will always just depend on them finding it in their hearts to love us, and that we can't control it. We can't make someone love us. That song,
How awful.
I can't make you love me if you
That's
don't.
like
I
the
can't make your heart.
realist song.
It's, that is real dependence. God's love is unconditional and unchanging, but other people's love is kind of just, you hope that they find it in themselves. And that's something we have to hold, I think.
Well, and I also think it helps to remember that love is not just a sentiment, it's an act of the will. It's willing the good of the other, it's trying to see them as God does. And I think a lot of that anxiety comes out of the sense of how will they feel in the moment? Will they be that, kind of flush of infatuation? Will they be attracted to me? And that's all can be part of forming love, but it's not the core of what love is. And if it were, we wouldn't be capable of loving other people while they had stomach flu, right? Love is an act of the will. It's willing this person's good, it's reacting to them, and asking God to give you the grace to love them as God does, etc. And I think then that is more reassuring because we don't constantly have to inspire the sentiments we associate with love for someone to love us faithfully.
Yeah. Confusing sentiments with an act is we do that a lot.
For me, what made me feel most marriageable in my whole life possibly was when my college boyfriend had stomach flu. And I come back to this example because I just never knew till that moment, if I'm caring for someone who's just horribly throwing up again and again, will I run away? And I didn't. And I felt very bad for him, but I didn't. And I did want to be there with him, even though objectively what was happening was not pleasant to be around. That's what love is. It's the good times that help prepare you for the bad times. But love is about wanting to be with someone who is suffering because you love them. Even when you can't do anything more but hold their hand and pray, you want to be there.
Yeah.
And isn't that just what makes us all the most lovable? Is just our ability to just be present. It's so easy that's why we don't do it. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a trick. But actually, what makes us most lovable and most marriageable is just our willingness to actually just let someone be in our presence completely, regardless of like their circumstances. I don't think we realize how wonderful we are to be with. I don't think we realize that that's really all we ever need to bring to the table. Not that your care wasn't 5-star. I'm sure it was amazing. But I think that is slept on for sure.
Yeah. Is there any particular advice you have about singleness or single living that you think should be looked at? What would you say to that?
My big advice about that is that I'm Catholic, so we do think there's particular vocations to singleness and consecrated life, in addition to the possibility of living a holy life as a single person outside of religious orders. But when you think about the people who enter religious life, people don't just say, well, singleness is just the absence of marriage, so just go on being a person. They say, yeah, living in community as a single person or living as a hermit in a single tradition is a hard discipline because you lack a lot of the feedback that people get from their friendships or their marriages about who they are, about growing in community. So you've got to do really specific spiritual formation when you say, I affirmatively want a life of singleness so I can give everything to God. Your spiritual advisor will say, great, I'm here to support you in that. It's quite hard. So it has to be a deliberate choice with deliberate practices to sustain you spiritually. And I think what's very hard is that for a lot of people who are single not by choice, there's both the hope that it's a temporary status, so there's less investment in what will it take to carry me through this season, and there's not a lot of spiritual resources for, all right, well, you are single now, possibly not forever, but you're still called to imitate Christ in making a total gift of self of your life. And you may not be doing it as a cloistered religious. So what is it you are going to do that makes a gift of your life and allows you to receive others' life as a gift? There's no exemption from that call, whatever your state of life. But that's where I think we really do a poor job supporting people through that. We support people through, well, keep dating so you can start your real life. And that's not a satisfactory or whole answer.
Totally.
God wants you to be holy and like him right now, today, tomorrow, no matter what happens next.
Yeah. That's so beautiful, thinking about how to make your life a gift to others. Yeah.
To make it deliberate. To deliberately choose the life you've been given today. It's so hard. There have been so many times when I've wished, like, God, if you just told me that I for sure was never going to meet anybody, I'd be the best hermit in the world. You know, I would. And I mean an ideal hermit, you know, like someone who is working on their solitude and hopefully gifting in all kinds of ways and giving anonymous gifts all over town. Just like budgeting my money differently, all kinds of things.
No,
but yeah, I
it's so
think
hard.
we might have to hold those two things at the same time.
My husband and I had this experience on a different level because we suffered a number of miscarriages while hoping to be parents. And again, if we had a sense of it's impossible for us to have children, we'd go, okay, well, we'll build our lives around that. And instead, we had this uncertainty of what it would mean. Would all of our children be so short-lived so that we were parents, but not in the way we hoped? And we had to love them in a very different way than the way we imagined. We have 3 living children. We don't know what will happen next if we conceive again. And the uncertainty was very, very hard versus saying, I know what I long to be called to. I have no idea whether or when you might call me to it, God. In the meantime, my job is simply to love each child I have for whatever length of time I'm given them to love.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Leah, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. You're such a beautiful person, and I've just appreciated your thoughts so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your book. I've had so many great conversations with friends about it. The message that I take away from your book is that dependence is not simply weakness. Dependence is like how we experience and open ourselves up to love. And that is the opposite of invincibility, not weakness. It's love. And yeah.
And if we can't be grateful for the ways our weakness exposes us to the love of other people, we cannot be grateful for the way God loves us and how he's created us.
Yeah. So there's such a wholeness to this process.
Amen.
So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Amen.